Hi, I'm Mary, and I'm 30 years old. Recently, I became a mother for the first time. It's an exciting but also challenging time, and I'm learning how to balance everything that comes with taking care of a newborn. Those first few days at home with my baby boy were full of happiness, but they were also exhausting. I knew having a baby would change things, but I didn't realize how tough it would be to physically recover from childbirth, while also managing the house and taking care of my son. Everything at home was a bit chaotic. Laundry was piling up, and the dishes were often left in the sink for longer than I wanted. It was hard to find a moment for myself, and I was constantly running around, trying to meet my baby's needs. One afternoon, while I was attempting to calm my crying son, the doorbell rang unexpectedly. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I was surprised to find my mother-in-law, Janet, standing at the door. She walked into our living room, and I could see her eyes moving over the mess, the toys scattered around, the clutter, and the unwashed dishes in the kitchen. It wasn't exactly the way I wanted her to see our home, but I hadn't had a chance to tidy up. Janet looked at me, and I could sense a mix of worry and judgment in her eyes. "I thought I'd come by to check on you," Janet said as she carefully stepped over a baby toy on the floor. "Jerry mentioned you might need some help." "Thanks, Janet," I replied, trying my best to sound calm even though I was feeling overwhelmed. "Things are a bit crazy right now, but we're managing." Janet didn't seem convinced. She walked into the kitchen, and the sound of unwashed dishes clinking against each other made me feel even more self-conscious. "Looks like you could use more than just a little help," she said sharply. "This place is a mess. Is this how you plan to raise my grandsons?" Her words stung, and I felt a rush of emotions: frustration, sadness, and stress all at once. I had been trying my hardest to keep up with everything, but in that moment, it felt like nothing I did was good enough. "I'm doing the best I can," I replied, holding my son a bit closer to me, as if trying to shield myself from her judgment. Janet sighed, clearly not impressed. "Mary, being a mother is about prioritizing. And right now, it looks like you aren't prioritizing anything properly." Before I could say anything else, Jerry, my husband, walked into the room. He quickly sensed the tension and tried to smooth things over. "Mom, Mary is doing an amazing job," he said, coming to my defense. "It's been really tough, especially with the baby not sleeping well." Instead of calming down, Janet turned to Jerry with a serious look. "You need to help her understand what's important here. It's not just about cleaning the house. It's about being responsible. She's not living up to the family standards." I could see Jerry was caught in the middle. He looked at me, then back at his mother, unsure of what to say. "Mom, let's not do this right now. Mary is still recovering," but Janet cut him off. "That's exactly the time when discipline needs to be taught," she said, her voice rising. "If she learns to manage things now, she'll be better off in the future. You can't be too easy on her, Jerry." I was stunned when Jerry hesitated, and then finally said, "Maybe you're right, Mom. Maybe Sophie does need to learn the hard way." Hearing those words from my husband felt like a punch to the gut. I couldn't believe he would side with his mother, especially when he had seen how hard I was trying. Janet gave a firm nod, as if she had won the argument. She pushed Jerry toward me, saying, "Show her that this kind of behavior can't be tolerated." In that moment, I felt completely overwhelmed. It wasn't just the physical exhaustion or the mess around the house, it was the feeling of being judged and misunderstood by the people who were supposed to support me. Motherhood was already hard, and I was doing my best, but it felt like nothing was enough for Janet. That day made me realize how important it is to have a support system that understands what new mothers go through. It's not just about keeping the house clean or meeting family standards. It's about doing your best, even when things feel overwhelming, and having people who lift you up instead of tearing you down. I barely had time to react before Jerry's hand struck my cheek. The sound echoed through the room, loud and shocking. It was a moment I'll never forget, a line that should never have been crossed. I held our baby boy close, his cries mixing with the sound of my racing heartbeat. "Jerry, what are you doing?" I managed to ask through tears. The pain from the slap was nothing compared to the pain of betrayal. I couldn't believe this was happening. "This is for your own good, Mary," Jerry said, his voice flat and empty. He didn't even look me in the eyes. "You need to learn." The room fell silent. The only sound was the soft whimpers of our son. Jerry glanced at me, his face showing a mix of frustration and embarrassment, but it didn't feel like an apology. Janet, his mother, stood there with a stern expression, not saying a word, but her presence alone was enough to make things worse. She didn't move, didn't flinch. She just stood there, watching as if she had expected this to happen. What was supposed to be a visit to help me had turned into something else entirely. Instead of support, I got judgment, and now this is a slap that shook my entire world. It was like everything I thought I knew about family was crumbling around me. As Janet prepared to leave, she whispered something to Jerry at the door. I couldn't hear all of it, but her smug look and Jerry's troubled face told me it wasn't anything kind. I could feel the coldness in the air, and it made my heart sink even more. That night, after the chaos of the day, I rocked my son to sleep, trying to soothe him as much as myself. But the fear and dread wouldn't leave me. What was supposed to be a loving family now felt like something else entirely. It felt like I was being judged, like I was on trial, and I was failing in their eyes. As I held my son close, I made a decision. I needed to get out. Not just for my safety, but for his too. The house that once felt like a home now felt like a prison, built by the very people who were supposed to love and protect us. I realized that this wasn't a place where I could raise my son safely. Jerry had crossed a line, and I couldn't trust him anymore, especially with his mother's influence always lurking in the background. That night, I couldn't bear to sleep next to Jerry. Instead, I took my baby to the nursery, a small room that had become my sanctuary in the past few weeks. As I sat in the rocking chair, holding my son, the events of the day played over and over in my mind. Each time I thought about it, the pain and betrayal grew stronger. I knew that I couldn't stay. The next morning, while Jerry was at work and Janet was thankfully gone, I made a call. Maria, a close friend who had offered her help before, answered quickly. Jess, it's me. I need that help you offered, I said, my voice shaking with a mix of fear and determination.
Say no more, Mary.
I'll come by today with my truck. We can move your things to my place until you figure out where you want to go, Maria responded, her voice calm and reassuring. We came up with a simple but risky plan. During the day, I would pack as much as I could, just the essentials for my son and me. Maria would come by in the evening, and we would quietly move everything out before Jerry came home. I knew I couldn't face him again, not after what had happened. It was dangerous to stay, and I couldn't risk him or Janet finding out what I was planning. As I packed, my heart raced, but I knew it was the right thing to do. This wasn't just about me. I had to protect my son and give him the safe, loving environment he deserved. I couldn't let him grow up in a house where violence was acceptable, where control and manipulation were the norms. Leaving was hard, but staying would have been harder. This was the beginning of a new chapter for us, one where I could finally breathe and my son could grow up in peace. I stood there, thinking about what would happen if I faced Jerry again. He might try to apologize, or worse, Janet might convince him to continue controlling me. I couldn't let that happen. I knew I had to leave. All day, as I packed my things, every baby outfit and toy felt heavy with memories. I couldn't stop thinking about the life I had imagined, the family I had wanted to build with Jerry. But the sharp memory of Jerry's slap and Janet's cold, judgmental eyes reminded me that staying wasn't an option anymore. By late afternoon, most of my things were packed into boxes. I hid everything in the garage, trying to stay calm and focused. Maria, my best friend, arrived just as the sun began to set. Her arrival felt like a glimmer of hope in what had been one of the hardest days of my life. "Are you ready?" Maria asked as she stepped inside, looking at the boxes and bags scattered around. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied, holding my baby boy a little closer to my chest. I had to do this for him, for both of us. We moved quickly, loading everything into our truck. We worked silently but efficiently, as if we had done this 100 times before. The last room I packed was the nursery. It had been my little sanctuary, the only place in the house where I had felt safe and at peace. I took one last look around, saying a quiet goodbye to the life I had dreamed of having with Jerry. But I knew now that this dream was over. As we drove away, I watched the house fade in the rearview mirror. A chapter in my life was closing, and though my heart felt heavy, I also felt a flicker of hope. My baby slept peacefully in his car seat, unaware of the big change happening, but finally, I knew he was safe. This was the first night of our new life, a life where fear and manipulation no longer had control over us. When we arrived at Maria's place, I felt a wave of relief. Her home was filled with warmth and safety, a stark contrast to the oppressive feeling that had taken over my own home. Being there made me even more determined to make sure Jerry and Janet couldn't hurt us again. I realized that simply leaving wasn't enough. I needed to ensure that they couldn't twist the story in their favor or ever put someone else through what I had experienced. I started by reaching out to family and friends, pretending I just wanted to catch up. During these conversations, I carefully gathered bits of information, subtly recording any mentions of Janet's controlling behavior or Jerry's strange willingness to follow her lead. Some people were hesitant to talk, but many hadn't realized how deep Janet's manipulation ran. Over time, I began to collect text messages, voicemails, and even recorded calls that painted a clear picture of what was really happening behind closed doors. The most valuable piece of evidence came when I managed to record a video of Janet coaching Jerry on how to control me. Her words made it clear that this wasn't about concern or love, it was about power and control. Once I had gathered enough evidence, I decided it was time to confront them. I chose a family gathering hosted by Jerry's sister. It was a neutral place with plenty of family members present. Some of them had already hinted that they were uncomfortable with the way Janet dominated the family, so I hoped this would be the right time and place to reveal the truth. On the day of the gathering, I was nervous. My hands shook and my heart raced, but I knew this had to be done. I arrived with Maria by my side, her support giving me the strength to go through with it. As I walked into the room, I could feel the tension. People greeted me with quiet murmurs, but everyone seemed to know something was off. Word about Jerry and Janet's behavior had spread through the family, and even the relatives who lived far away had heard rumors. After the initial greetings, I took a deep breath and prepared myself for what was to come. It was time to show everyone who Jerry and Janet really were, and to finally take control of my life again. I stood up, my hands shaking, but my voice was steady. "I have something important to say," I began, as everyone in the room turned to look at me. I could feel all eyes on me, but I knew this had to be done. It's about Jerry and his mother, Janet, and how their actions have affected not just me and my son, but the whole family. Jerry looked shocked, and I could see the fear in his eyes as he tried to stop me. "Mary, let's not do this here," he said, trying to interrupt, but I didn't back down. "No," I replied, pulling out my phone. "This is not just a personal issue." I connected my phone to the Bluetooth speaker, and the room fell silent. The recordings began to play Janet's cold, controlling voice telling Jerry how to handle me, and Jerry's hesitant agreements. It was all there, plain as day, their plans to fix my behavior. The reactions in the room were immediate. Some people looked shocked, others disgusted. Jerry's aunt, who had always been kind to me, looked heartbroken. She turned to Janet, her voice shaking. "Is this true, Janet? Were you really forcing Jerry to do this?" Janet's face turned red with anger and fear. "These are taken out of context," she snapped, trying to defend herself. But it was too late. Jerry's cousin, who had been quietly observing until now, stood up. "No, they aren't out of context. We've seen signs of this for years, but we didn't want to believe it." That moment changed everything. Family members began to speak up, sharing their own experiences with Janet's controlling ways. Slowly, a picture emerged of a woman who had manipulated her family for years, hiding behind the role of a caring mother. Jerry sat there in silence, looking pale and overwhelmed, finally seeing the truth about his mother's control over his life. As the family meeting turned into a heated discussion about Janet's influence, I felt a huge weight lift off my shoulders. The truth was out. It wasn't just me who saw it now. Everyone in the room knew. The family, who had been under Janet's control for so long, finally saw her manipulations for what they were. After the confrontation, there was a quiet, somber feeling in the air. The family, long under Janet's influence, now had to come to terms with what had been going on for years. The shock was clear on their faces, and it was uncomfortable for everyone to realize how deeply Janet had affected their lives. For me, the decision to leave Jerry was painful, but it was also necessary. After everything that had happened, there was no going back. As the family began to leave, I gathered my son, who was blissfully unaware of the storm around him. With one last look at the family home, I stepped into the unknown, knowing I was doing the right thing for us. Jerry watched us leave, his face filled with sadness and regret. His voice, once so familiar, now felt distant as he whispered a weak goodbye. I didn't look back. Janet, on the other hand, faced a much harsher reality. The family she had controlled for so long now saw her for who she really was. They began to distance themselves, realizing how much harm her actions had caused. Her attempts to regain control went unheard. The evidence from the recordings and the testimonies at the gathering had been too much for anyone to ignore. In the weeks that followed, Jerry tried to reach out to me. His messages were full of apologies, promises of change, and pleas for forgiveness. But the memory of his raised hand and his mother's influence over him was too much to forget. The trust between us had been broken, and with it, our marriage. I knew then that this was the end of one chapter and the beginning of a new one. I wasn't just leaving a bad situation, I was starting a new life, one where I could be free from control and fear and focus on raising my son in a safe, loving environment. I found a new home in a small apartment, far away from the neighborhood I used to call home. It was a place where no one knew my story, and I could start over without the weight of the past following me. My friend Maria stayed by my side, helping me through this new chapter in life. I was grateful for her support as I figured out how to build a life that felt safe for both me and my son. My days were simple, but filled with purpose. I spent most of my time caring for my son and slowly putting the pieces of my life back together. The healing process wasn't easy, it was slow, and sometimes it hurt more than I expected. There were days when the weight of everything that had happened felt too heavy to bear. But the freedom to make my own choices, without fear of being controlled or manipulated, kept me going. It felt like a fresh start, a chance to live on my own terms. I started going to therapy, where I learned how to heal from the emotional wounds I carried. I also joined support groups for single mothers, and meeting others who had gone through similar experiences helped me feel less alone. Over time, the broken pieces of who I once was began to come back together. I wasn't the same person I had been before, though. I was stronger now, more resilient. I had learned how to stand up for myself and protect my son from anything that might harm us. My son's laughter became my anchor, pulling me through even the toughest days. Watching him grow and hit new milestones brought me so much joy, and each little moment gave me more hope for our future. As he learned to walk and talk, I felt my confidence growing, too. I was learning how to be a mother, how to build a safe and loving home, and how to live a life that was free from fear. Months passed, and before I knew it, a year had gone by. One evening, after putting my son to bed, I sat down in our cozy living room. It was filled with his drawings and toys, signs of the happy life we were building together. I couldn't help but think about how far we had come. The pain of the past was still there, like a shadow, but it wasn't as overwhelming as it had once been. The light of new beginnings was brighter, and the support of friends like Maria and the unconditional love of my son gave me strength. That night, as I sipped a cup of tea, I realized I was finally ready to share my story. I started a blog, a space where I could write about what I had been through. It wasn't just for me. It was also for others who might be going through similar struggles. I wanted to connect with people who were facing manipulation or abuse and let them know they weren't alone. Every blog post I wrote was a step away from the victim I used to be and a step closer to becoming someone who could help others. As I reflected on my journey, I realized I had grown into an advocate. I had found my voice, and I was using it to speak out against the kind of control and manipulation I had once lived under. My story was one of resilience, of finding strength in the face of hardship. Now, as I conclude my story, I want to leave you with a question to think about. Do you believe it's possible to fully break free from the control of a manipulative family? Or do the effects of those relationships stay with us forever? I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments. Let's keep this conversation going and support one another.